Well, welcome to our Wednesday Bible study. We're ready for a small group Bible study. We're doing this virtually, as you will see, and as you probably already know. But we want you to imagine that you've gathered around the table with some Christian friends. We're going to open our Bibles together. We're going to study together, discuss together, learn together, grow together. So we're looking forward to that. We're using the book, More Than a Carpenter. You see it on the screen there in front of you, by Josh McDowell. It's been a bestseller for decades. And it tells a bit of Josh's story, starting out as really an atheist and coming to faith in Christ as he really looked into who Jesus was and who Jesus claimed to be. And I think we'll share with you a little bit more about that as we go forward. Right now, I want to bring in the rest of our on-screen Bible study group. And we want to hear from you who are our not on-screen Bible study group as well, because we want you to comment. We want you to ask questions, answer questions. So you can start hitting that like button if you'd like. We want to hear from you and to get started. How's everybody doing well tonight?
Doing good.
Okay, very good. Now, I'm going to move Adam up here into the top position for just a second because he's going to take a little bit of time and just kind of do a little bit of review, and then we're all going to jump back on the screen and we'll get started. So, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a second, okay?
All righty. Well, thank you guys again for joining us in our second week for More Than a Carpenter as we go through this book discussion. Again, if you are joining us, whether it be live or even later on, we still like your comments, man. Doesn't matter where you're at. Say hi, howdy, hello, whatever you want. But just we would like to know that you are engaging with us. So last week, if this is the first time that you're watching this or hearing this, last week we started a book series called More Than a Carpenter. It's written by Josh McDowell, who was a skeptic, kind of a borderline, I guess if you could say, atheist. He wrote this book back in the early 70s. More than 15 million copies has been sold worldwide. But he wrote this book to examine the evidence of Jesus. And basically what he does is he investigates primarily three different things. One, the biblical records of the Word of God, the Bible. Is this validated? Is this true? What proofs do we have? And so forth. Number two, he looks at the resurrection. And then three, he looks at the relationship between faith and science. Last week, we went over chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1 was all about my story and then also what makes Jesus so different. If you haven't gotten this book yet, I would highly recommend. You can also find our study guide on our church Facebook page right here. Click on the PDF right there, or on our website, calvarydv.com. Click on the news. It is right there. But just like anything else, we are going to dive in tonight into chapters 3 and 4, Lord, Liar, and Lunatic, and What About Science? But just like any other time, man, we kind of want to just kind of break the ice rather than just dive it into the 12 feet of the swimming pool. We kind of want to go a little bit in a little bit first. We got to get our feet wet. So that being said, the question that we have for all of you all this evening is this: what is one, not the, but what is one of the hardest things that you have ever done? What is one of the hardest things that you've ever done?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think a lot of the things that have been difficult in my life have been people related. My wife and I have relocated twice, and we're about to do it a third time. We relocated from Portsmouth to Sandusky, Ohio, and Sandusky to Chillicothe, and now we're going from Chillicothe, Ohio to Charleston, West Virginia. And every time there's people and dear friends that you just hate to leave. And, you really, what's neat about it is really you don't leave them, you leave them only in the physical sense, but they're friends for life and they're the family for life. Moving and relocating, leaving our son at college, that was painful. The first time we did that, took him to Miami of Ohio, and, leaving him in a dorm room with a young man that he had never met before. And that's just tough. So those were some of mine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, mine's mine's a lot similar to Joe's. Is anytime the kids left home, two of them left for college, but only stayed gone for a year and came back. But now all three of them don't live here in the house with us. And so that's been one of the hardest things for us.
Okay.
I'm going to add to the list. You've all stolen mine. I was going to say, I'm going to quote from Dickens here, but it was the best of times and the worst of times. But each time we took one of our children off to college and left them, it's always sad. But at the same time, yay! I can be one to go on. No, time out. But this is, you raise them to go out and start the next chapter of their life. So it was the celebration. But it's tough. You've had them, you've cared for them, you know where they're at, you know what they're doing, you love them, and then suddenly you've sort of taken one step toward releasing them. So it looks like we're all on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
I think mine would be like one of the hardest things I've ever would picking out my shirt that I was going to wear tonight. But I mean, rather than that, I just play.
I was going to say it's working with the people that's on screen here, but I thought
that's legitimately. No, that's true.
No, not true. That is not true.
I think real quick, one of the hardest things, but one of the hardest things was just going back to college when married and doing full-time school, full-time job, raising kids, all that stuff, but was actually writing college papers. I don't know about you all, but I hate writing college papers. And I remember, honestly, 6 months into my marriage, and I write my first paper, and I'll never forget this. And I'm all excited. I haven't written a paper for I don't know how many years. I take it upstairs, and like not even 5 minutes later, my wife is just like, okay, I've checked it. And I go upstairs, it's got red all over my paper. I'm like, babe, what did you do? And she goes, babe, honestly, I think a fifth grader could have wrote, a lot better than this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, it was just like a shock and everything else. So I think that was the hardest thing to do and the hardest thing to hear.
Yeah.
So, but I start off with that. And as we're about to dive into this evening, again, we want to hear from you all. What's one of the hardest things that you've ever done? But I mention that because I think if you have read the book, I think one of the hardest things that Josh McDowell would have done is he left college. He was in pre-law. He left the country, matter of fact, to go on this journey for truth, to actually seek out if Jesus is who he says he is. He actually went to Europe and different countries and so forth, just putting together the research of, is Jesus really who he says he is? So, based upon the reading for our question,
can we tell folks how they can get one of these very nicely done, very nicely produced study guides?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm leaving it to you. I'm not sure I know where to go get this. That's the reason I'm just flagging you.
Okay.
Or to get the book.
You could go to calvarydv.com and click on the news. Once you click on the news, it is right there. It's a PDF file, so you can bring it up right there on your screen. Or if you are on Facebook, the post that was today, you can actually click on that as well too. It's the same PDF, and it'll bring it right up. And we have these always available pretty much on Mondays or Tuesdays.
And if you're here on Sundays and you see me or maybe Lisa, actually right back there on that shelf, we have a number of copies of this little paperback. We'd be happy to take them off that shelf and put them in your hands. So that'd be great. Okay, Adam, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, it's a very basic, very simple question based upon the reading of these two chapters, Lord, Liar, or Lunatic, and What About Science? What is something that you all learned that you would like to share with everyone?
Well, I guess I'll head out one more time. I guess I had never really considered the ramifications of what if Jesus claims to be God were false. I mean, if it were a false claim, in like the title implies, it's either liar or lunatic, and that just flies in the face of his life. If he was a liar, that conflicts with everything he does. It doesn't provide any explanation as to his miracles. What about his ability to carry out a life of nobility and purity? If he was a lunatic, how did he convince all these people to follow him? And how did he live a life that was so wonderful? And how did he say some of the most profound things that have ever been said? I guess I just never really pondered that much. And that was helpful to me to understand that.
I love how Josh points out that Christian faith isn't blind or an ignorant faith. I mean, I think so many times, Hollywood wants to portray Christianity as that we're weak-minded, we're disillusioned, just kind of dumb in our thinking. But that's not the case. Jesus didn't call us to follow with just a warm heart feeling, but with an intelligent faith. So I really like that. And I think we get down into that a little bit more in our questions.
Yeah. You don't check your brain in order to be a Christian.
Exactly.
No, you don't.
It's based on historical facts. I guess I was just reminded that tonight you asked about what stood out to you, but your view of Jesus requires a decision. If you say he's a liar, if you say he's just out of his mind, or if you say he's Lord, all those require. I mean, he demands it's not something you can be ambivalent about, and there is no middle ground, and that's kind of what this whole chapter is about. Well, Jesus was a good teacher, a good example for us, a good person, did a lot of good things, but he's not God. Well, he claimed to be God, so let's just figure this out logically. So that's where we're going. Good stuff.
And that's matter of fact, that's interesting that you said that. That's actually question number 2, because if you guys are just now tuning in, watching, listening to us, whatever else, you're like, okay, where are they getting all this stuff? Josh McDowell in chapter 3, Lord, Liar, and Lunatic, he actually took that title and statement from a very renowned author by C.S. Lewis, who wrote multiple books. You might be familiar with one of them, the Chronicles of Narnia and so forth. But he actually made this statement. He said, a man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You don't have the option here. And so the question that we wanted to throw out to you all is, based upon C.S. Lewis's statement, what would you say to someone? Because I'm telling you, I've had multiple conversations based upon this question. I've had throughout the years. What would you tell someone who that you're having a conversation with? They say, yes, I think Jesus is a great moral teacher. I think he is a great leader. But rather than that's it. What would you tell someone? How would you engage? How would you reply to the response on that?
Yeah, good question. Now I'm going to break in here just a moment. We've now set a record for the longest time we've been online, and no one's given us a comment yet. Okay, so let's just get a comment going, and we want your comments. Where are your comments? Get them coming.
No other reason, do it to make sure that I have everything right.
No, it's working because my comment, where's the comments, just popped up, so we know it's working.
Yes.
But so we want your comments. We want to know you're here. If nothing else, just say I'm watching. We see the numbers on the screen, so we know there's some folks watching. So we appreciate that. All right, let's get on with this question right here is in front of us. And what would you say to someone? Well, I'd probably just hand them Josh's book because he does an excellent job of it. But you can't have it both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really can't have it both ways. And when you think about this, if he was a moral teacher, but you were denying the fact that he is God when he said he was God, then that just doesn't work. I mean, a good person wouldn't tell a lie to begin with, and a good person wouldn't tell a colossal lie like that. And I was just thinking, I want to read just a couple verses from John 20 here, and this is after the resurrection, and Thomas, you remember he wasn't there at the first resurrection appearance with the other disciples. So Jesus shows up the next week. He says, reach out your hand and so forth. And Thomas answered, this 28, John 20. And Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. It couldn't be more clear that Thomas was making a statement that he believed that Jesus was God. And Jesus answers this in 29. Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So Jesus commends him, and he also commends those who believe without having the evidence that he had right there in front of them. They operated on faith based on the apostles' testimony. But if that had been a perfect opportunity for Jesus to correct the error, if he really was not claiming to be God. He really was God, and that's what he claimed to be.
Mhm.
Who wants to go next? I'm going to put you in the number one position here.
I'll do it.
I was just gonna go ahead.
Go,
No,
go
Joe,
for it,
ahead.
Adam. No, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
All right, I'm sorry.
You're in box number one.
There you go. So it also conflicts with what other people said about him. In John 5, verse 18, it said, "For this reason they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father." And here's the key text here, making himself equal with God. So not only did Jesus not correct Thomas, not only did he say this in a variety of different ways, many people around him recognized it and recognized that he was calling himself God, that he was calling himself Christ. Today, there are millions of Christians all over the world that are testifying to that very faith. And of course, it's obviously, well, we already said, Jesus said that very thing about himself. So there's a multitude of indicators that Jesus, the people around him, and millions of people today all testify to the fact that we believe he is indeed the Christ.
Very good.
Amen.
We have a good comment from Pam that a man who convinced so many that he was God, but was only a moral teacher, wouldn't only be a liar or lunatic, but a con man. The greatest con man that ever lived, and that is absolutely true. And everything about his character mitigated against him being, and you think about, if you pull a hoax on somebody or to, even just out and out lie, most people would not be willing to die for a lie. If it came down to your life, okay, it's up. I admit I lied, whatever. But, he gave his life. The apostles gave their life, so all the above. Who wants to go next? Adam, you were chomping a bit. I'm going to get you up in number one.
I was just going to say this, that I think when engaging with other people, and I'm having this conversation in previous years and so forth, because a lot of times, and we'll get to that here in coming weeks, but a lot of times, the Bible says this, the Bible says this. Well, I don't believe in the Bible, and we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. But what I want to come to is, though, a lot of people are like, well, he was a moral teacher, he was this and this and this. But I want to get to the point where, like, okay, this is all great and good, and this is all dandy, but what did he claim? Like, let's do the basis of this first. Like, why was he on trial? When I get people to on that commonality, it's just like, okay, I would agree with you. Yes, that he claimed this. Not necessarily mean that, I believe that he is, whatever else. But it's like, okay, so you say that you claim that you would agree that he claims it. Oh, yeah. Once they're at that point, then it's just like, okay, let's talk about those 3 points that C.S. Lewis was talking about. Okay, either he is a liar, that's we've already talked about. Either he is a man, a lunatic, or he is Lord. But then my next question would be like, okay, what's most probable? If you think he's a moral teacher, but yet you don't believe that he is the Son of God, then evidently he's not moral. He goes against everything because the teachings that he does. And I just kind of go down the list, but I want them to kind of to think about what is the most probable conclusion, or what is the most probable option just to further the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I would lean in on them and challenge them to read the 4 Gospels. And then after they've read that, if they really wanted to take it even further, I would challenge them to read A Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And then you can have like a really good conversation.
Good point.
Yeah. I like, go ahead, Justin.
I was going to say, and don't dismiss this without doing your own research. That's sort of one of the themes of this book. That's what this man did. You mentioned Lee Strobel, that he was a journalist who set out to disprove that the resurrection and Jesus and the whole story was just a myth. He winds up being a believer and a defender of the faith. So do your own research and see where it leads you. Don't be afraid of finding out what Jesus claimed and who he is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like how Lisa said, you want to continue the conversation. I think if a person is open, man, that's what I like. I like having an open dialogue with people. I'm not trying to, force this or whatever else. But if you came to me and we're talking about this particular topic, I want to continue on this subject. So just like the people did with Josh McDowell, like, hey, I want to encourage you to kind of do your own research, not what I said, he said, she said, or whatever else, but go find this truth that is made completely available to you for us to have this ongoing conversation. So
Very well said.
One of the things that I really respected about Josh McDowell, he kind of hit a pause button on his college career. He hit a pause button on his future life as maybe an attorney. And his desire to know the truth was so important to him that he went to Europe. He researched all these texts. He went to all these libraries. He did everything he knew to do to find out exactly how he felt about Christ. And he came to a very definitive conclusion, of course, that he was Christ and was God.
Yeah, and that conclusion, that's why this next question where we dive into kind of goes more into chapter 4, because a lot of times people are like, okay, I can have this ongoing conversation with you, but it's going to stop because prove it to me, right? Scientifically prove it to me. And so our next question is,
Before we
go ahead.
I just want to take a moment, because we have people joining us all the time, and let's go over that liar, lunatic, and Lord thing. You want to take us to what Joe? You want to take us through the logic of that?
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. If he was a liar, then he lived an entire life. I mean, that's a lot to call upon somebody to live your entire life without ever breaking character, without ever making a mistake, without ever breaking down. And in doing so, he brought about, if Christ was a liar, then he brought about his own crucifixion. And I can't think of anybody who would be willing to do that. If he was a lunatic, we said before, how could a lunatic do what he did? How could he perform the miracles? How could he give the Sermon on the Mount? How could he say words that were so profound that even today they change people's lives every day? So he wasn't a liar. He wasn't a lunatic. That really only leaves one option, as Jess Wagner said, and I totally agree. This is not something you can remain neutral about. Some people, I think, have this misconception that if they don't call him Lord, then they haven't really made a decision. They have. If you haven't chosen God to be your Lord, you've already made a decision, and that's a shame.
Your mic's off.
Your mic's off, Jess.
Everybody say in unison, his mic is off. I was just going to say, because most people, decent people, don't want to insult Jesus. They want to give him some credit. Okay, love your neighbors yourself. Well, that's a good thing to say. That's give him some props for that. So he's a good person, but he claimed to be God. If you believe he did, we see that, and we saw it in Scripture. If he claimed to be God, then then he's a liar. If he's a liar, then he can't be this wonderful teacher. Okay, if he claimed to be God and knew he wasn't, he's a liar, so he's not a good person. If he thought he was a God, he was not God, but thought he was, then that's where the lunatic part comes in. He's not dealing with reality, not rational. So how can he be this wonderful role model if he's out of his mind? But if he claimed to be God and he was God, then he's Lord. C.S. Lewis called it the trilemma. This, a dilemma is between two things. You have these three options, and one of them has to be real, based on his claims. And he was not bashful. He was not reluctant to claim that he was God. Okay, I just thought it'd be good here in the middle, just to kind of give that refresher there. So Adam, move us forward, if you will.
Well, just based on that, a lot of times though, when people come to that point in the conversation, they're like, okay, yes, I can somewhat agree with you that Jesus claimed to be God, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe in him or whatever else. But it's just like, prove to me the claims of Christianity. And so what do you think, what would be the true motive of a skeptic who asks for scientific proof for the claims of Christianity? What would you all say?
I think one thing that some people do is they assume that they have to have scientific evidence of God and that Christ was God. I remember you all may remember a gentleman named Carl Sagan, who was an astrophysicist, and he was a devout atheist. And he made a lot of claims about his atheism. So after he passed, his wife's name was Anne Druin. They asked her, what about it? Did he have any deathbed confession? Did he have it? Did he claim to want to know something about Christ, as he was dying? And she said no. And she had, I thought, an important quote, because I think it reflects a lot of people's thought today. He said he didn't want to believe, he wanted to know.
Yeah.
And that's just not how it works. God gives us enough proof in our world that our faith is not without a basis. It most definitely has a basis, but not so much faith that it doesn't require some element of faith. And some people, they just struggle with that concept.
Yeah, I very well said, Joe. I appreciate that. It's great reflection on knowing and believing. In the book, in the chapter, I think it's chapter 4 about science, Josh McDowell does an excellent job of getting into this, because he talks about the scientific method means to test something and repeat the same outcome, within the parameters and all that sort of thing of the scientific method. But then he goes in and talks about, let me just make sure I get this correct from the book. There's another method of proof, which is the legal historical proof. This is like in a courtroom or a historian, that sort of thing. And it's based on oral testimony, written testimony, and exhibits, such as, here's a bullet casing or whatever it is. And he says the scientific method can only be used to prove repeatable things. Well, this is a historical person a couple thousand years ago. We can't repeat those events and have a record of them, but we do have oral testimony handed down, written testimony, and we have exhibits as fresh as today, what he's doing in people's lives today. So if we can just when people say, well, I need the science to prove it, I need proof, really that's not the even the format for that which is evidence. The format has to be this historical kind of a proof that we're talking about, sort of in a legal sense. Oral testimony, written testimony, documents, if you will, and any other proofs you can gather. So it's almost a false construct to say, well, the science doesn't prove these things to be true.
Yeah, I think the skeptic's motive in wanting to disprove the claims of Christianity is really mostly because it doesn't fit their narrative of how they want to live. It's not so much that they really want that scientific proof. I mean, a lot of them will take it, but they really just want it to fit, the way that Jesus asks us to live doesn't fit their narrative of how they want their life to be. So they want to disprove it or have it disclaimed, so it takes the guilt off of them for not, well, I can't follow that because it can't be proven,
Yeah, and usually the motive is something, I don't want to change my lifestyle, I don't want to disappoint someone else. There's a different motive than proof. Usually it's not a question of proof.
Correct.
And that's why I said earlier about an open dialogue conversation, because you have the type of people that it's just like, I'm done because you can't prove it. And then you have some people be like, okay, let's continue this conversation. Like, I'm a little curious now, like, what other proofs are there that you're suggesting, that you're saying? Because that allows me to be like, okay, this person is open to actually seek truth. And I know we're kind of jumping in. This is kind of part of question 5 as well, too, for those of you guys who are following along as well. But now I'm going to throw this out there as well, too. So, there's at least, here's another proof. There's at least 300 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. And when I was looking at this today, I'm like, man, this is so fascinating. So let me break this down for you all. Over at least 300 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Okay. There is a mathematician by the name of Peter Stoner. He said, all right, cool. Let's take at least just 8 of the 300 prophecies, and let's just kind of do a mathematical formula to see what is the probability of someone actually able to fulfill those 8 prophecies. The probability of this is it's a 1 to the 17th power. That is a lot of zeros. Now, for those of you all who are not or not math magicians like I am, let me put it to you in a better context of an illustration of what Peter Stoner said. And so I'm telling you, this kind of just, for me, validated even more of the claims of who Jesus Christ is, that he is the Son of God. Peter Stoner said it's just like this. Let's take the entire state of Texas and let's cover it with silver dollars 2 feet high. Now we're going to take a plane. We're going to fly over Texas. We're going to mark it with a red X on one of those 50-cent pieces or silver pieces and drop it in Texas. Next, we're going to take somebody on the Oklahoma line, blindfold them, spin them around, and tell them to go into Texas and put your hand in to try to find that one red X. And that, for me, was kind of put it in an illustration of, man, that was just 8 of the prophecies, and yet Jesus fulfilled even at least 300 of those prophecies. So I just thought that was fascinating. But
unmute your mic, Jess.
Thank you.
Sure.
As you were saying, I remember this is years ago. I was an emergency speaker at a camp for teenagers one year, and if you know me very well, it would have to be a real emergency because, Pastor Tim and Lisa and you, Adam, are good with that age, but it's not my forte. But anyway, I was speaking to this camp for a week. First day, a young lady came up. She's probably 15 or so. She marches right up to me and she says, "How do you know?" And she started down the list. Jesus is, the Bible's true and all this. And I gave my standard answers, and all she did was say, "But how do you know? How do you know? How do you know?" And it just like, I got nothing else here. Later that same week, she came to know Christ as her Savior. And I asked her, I said, "Do you remember back earlier in the week, you just kept saying, 'How do you know?'" And she said, "I just say that because I didn't want to hear what you have to say." It was just a turn-off mechanism. So praise the Lord, she came to embrace the truth, and it's a good story. Hey, Pam's got something. Someone will read that. Lisa, you want to read that for us?
Sure. Pam says, sometimes people ask for scientific proof because through childhood and education, we are taught not to accept anything that doesn't have proof. It is ingrained in us and takes a lot of talk and time to accept a truth, a statement as true without scientific proof.
Yeah.
I'd like to add on that just for a second. Really, the whole concept, and Jess was referring to this earlier, of scientific proof is a misnomer. Proof is for things that are bounded, things like logic or geometry or those kind of things where there's specific protocols and procedures that bounds what is the truth. Scientific methodology is based on empirical evidence. It's observation. And by its very definition, you can't prove things. It's only bounded by God, how God created the universe and how he interacts with it today. So this idea of a scientific proof is really an error in it, even in its terminology.
Well said, Joe. Thank you. Very, very well said.
yeah, it's kind of like Josh used the example of how could you prove that scientifically that you ate lunch, yesterday at such and such restaurant. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a couple of things, but he was going at it from the approach from the historical, legal historical proof, where you could go back and, could you talk to the witnesses? You could look at your receipts. Did you talk to your friends there, whatever else? And you collect that type of data as well. And I tell you what, on this particular subject, this is why for question number 4, because we kind of did 3 and 5 together. So
that was my fault, by the way.
No. That's fine. Let's just go with it. Go with it. For those of you all who are watching or tuning in, this is why we asked this question for number 4. Based on Matthew 22:37 through 40, why do you suppose Jesus emphasized all 3 aspects of loving God with our heart, soul, and mind? And if, Jesse, will you go ahead and read that?
I haven't looked it up yet. I'm sorry.
It's on the screen.
Oh, okay. I'll just read it off screen. Matthew 28:37-40. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbors yourself. Of these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So this is the framework. This is the bulwark. This is the foundation. And I'll start on this one if you don't mind with the question, because he mentions heart, soul, and mind, and why is that important? Well, I go back to my story of the little young lady at the camp I was mentioning there a moment ago. It was not a question of mind; it was a question of her soul and her heart. But it's also, you have to have the mind involved, because that's where you get the data upon which your belief system rests. So it's always a both and. It's never an either or. Mm-hmm. And we need to remember that in our evangelistic and our Bible teaching approach, that we need to inform the mind. We can't just be all emotion. We have to give the facts and the text and the data that's in the Bible. At the same time, we can't just give the data without how this touches the heart, what it means, something with the heart of God, His love, and so forth. And for our soul, the depths of, I think of soul. I think there's a verse in Ecclesiastes where it says God's put eternity in their hearts, and our souls are connected. We believe, we want to believe there's something more than this life, unless we have somehow concluded that out of us, and many people have. But it's all the above. That's what I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking that all of those, heart, soul, and mind, is really what makes up a human being. Maybe it's apart from the spirit being put in there. But so I think Jesus emphasized that to say that you'll love God more when you know Him better. And you do that by studying His word, by prayer, by developing a right relationship with Him, which will lead us to a better understanding of who He is.
I'm glad that this verse has the word heart in it. I think it's important just to remember the fact that back in that culture, the heart was kind of the seat of the emotions. It was the seat of the will. That's why in Proverbs 4:23 it says that's why we are told to guard our hearts, because out of it spring the issues of life. Biblically, one of the surest ways we can know someone's heart is just to look at their life and see how they're living their life. And so we need to be sure that our heart is in the right place in relation to that.
Yeah, and both of you all said the same thing. One, you're talking about relation, and Lisa, you're talking about this relationship with God. So the more that we know Him and we're obedient to Him, the more, in essence, the outpour of our love toward individuals, towards other people, not just the people that we know, but the people that we interact with. And, when I look at these three words, for the heart, yes, it is the emotion, the will, and the soul. It's kind of like, this is your will and your choice, and the mind is the intellect. And one of the things that I love about this is because in chapter 4, Josh was talking about this particular passage, and he was saying that, and I would have to agree with him. I really would. Just for the simple fact, I'm not knocking this, but I think a lot of times, Jesse, you were saying it in the approach of evangelism and just interacting with non-believers. I think sometimes we as Christians, or the world, thinks that when we leave the house, we leave our brain at the house. It's kind of like this blind faith. And so Josh was talking, and yes, I do have to agree. I think holistically, that's why Jesus is emphasizing all three. It's this holistic approach, not just giving our heart, and yes, I'm choosing, but also our minds and our intellect. Let's collect the facts. Let's begin to find out and realize, because God has revealed Himself to us in order for us to know Him more. And then also at the same time, Peter told us to be ready. He told us to be ready to give an answer. So anytime somebody wants to engage in a conversation with me throughout the years, I should be ready of why I believe what I believe, not just, because I feel this, which I'm not knocking that or whatever else, but let me go holistically of why I believe that Jesus is who He is. So, wow. Yeah, And that was good stuff. You guys have any other comment on that?
Well, I would encourage anyone that it's a, like I said, we have some that we have here at the church. We give them to you if you just ask for them. It's not an expensive book to get a hold of, but this is sort of like a modern Christian classic that would just be a good resource for your own faith, for your own heart, but also, as you talked about, Adam, just a moment ago, be ready. This is a ministry tool for you to help with, and it goes through just that whole science thing, and we face that all the time. We live in a world that really, in some ways, I might get in trouble for saying this, but almost worships at the altar of science. And we were fascinated. I was listening to a podcast earlier today where a guy was explaining that according to the theory of general relativity, there's no such thing as a gravitational force. And I'm like, okay, explain this to me. And he went on for 20 minutes, and I still don't have a clue what he was talking about. I'm sorry to be on my, but we're impressed that this person understands Einstein's writings and so forth, and we kind of value that in our culture. And there's nothing wrong with learning, and maybe the light will go on what this guy was talking about. But it's not just mind. Go back to the verse. It's heart and soul and mind. And it's got to touch all of us. And I love your all's comments were spot on. So good stuff.
I think one thing that's important for me to remember too is if we get wrapped around the actual science, one thing we have to remember with that also is that science is proven incorrect every day. That's why they call it a theory and not a proof. It's not a scientific proof, it's a scientific theory. Someone comes up with a hypothesis, they test it, and it's true just until someone else finds out it's incorrect. And I mean, at one time, everybody thought that our entire solar system revolved around the Earth, and that was scientific, theory back then. Of course, now we know that's crazy.
Yeah.
So we just got to be careful with that whole concept of science. It's not that we don't use it at all. We need to use it. But on the other hand, we need to realize its limitations.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is not that, we think, well, those things that are now not accepted, like you talked about the heliocentric, understanding that the sun is the center of the solar system and so forth. It's not that people long ago believed something different were deficient. They just didn't have as much information as we do.
That's
and that
correct.
Information keeps growing. One of my favorite stories is, this is way back before World War II. They did a study trying to find out which vegetables had the highest content of iron, because we wanted to get this nutritionally into the young boys and girls of America. So it was discovered that spinach had the highest iron content of any vegetable. And mothers all across the world were stuffing spinach down their kids' throats, which might be child abuse, I'm not sure. But you remember Popeye? The writers of Popeye made the secret sauce that made Popeye strong was spinach, to try to put this into kids' minds that spinach had all this extra iron. They restudied it years later and found out someone in the math had put a decimal point in the wrong place. It did not have like 10 times more iron than any other vegetable. It just had a normal amount. And it's just, sometimes, there's always subject for review. But God has delivered the truth. If you believe the Bible is from a God-sourced origin, which it is, and the prophecies fulfilled that Adam was talking about and so forth, then this puts it in a totally different category. It doesn't contradict reality, but it is God's revelation of what is real.
Right. Well, folks, we do thank you guys for joining us. I know that
we do.
That question right there, we kind of answered that with 3, but our next step is for you all is just this, man. And again, if you are just, is this the first time that you're joining us and you're hearing us and watching us, and it's just like, okay, maybe that is kind of interesting what you guys are talking about. Maybe I need to get this book. This is really what we want to challenge you all, not just last week and this week, but kind of throughout this book. This is one of the things. Just begin to be reflecting and thinking about, take time to ask yourself, man, why is it that I believe what I believe? And let me preface this. Whether you're a follower of Christ, why is it that you believe what you believe? If you're an atheist, why are you an atheist? Why is it that you believe what you believe? If you're agnostic, if you know what I'm saying, if you're all about the Jedi Church in California, what is it? Why do you believe what you believe? What validates that? That's what we want you to start thinking about and so forth. And then go ahead and prepare for next week, because it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Just for some fact, chapter 5 is probably one of the longest chapters in this book, and you will see why as you tune in next week. But I'm going to pass this on to Jesse, and you kind of take us out tonight.
Well, I want to just add on what you said. I know Lisa and Joe say that, believe the same thing and feel the same thing. Thank you so much for being part of this. We look forward to these studies. I'm glad we have this ability. We've enjoyed it for several months now, covering a number of topics, and we appreciate you being a part. Thank you for those of you that comment and encourage us in it. And some of you made comments to me personally when you've seen me, how much you appreciate this. So thank you for that. Thank you for the encouragement. But we hope to see you soon. We obviously will have our online service on Sunday, 10 a.m., in person at 8:45, 10 a.m., and 11:15 here at the church. And we're going to continue our study in the book of Ephesians. We got some great worship things coming up. We got a great ministry opportunity coming up that Pastor Adam is going to let us know about. So a great opportunity, especially as we head into the Christmas season in the not too distant future. So we're looking forward to that. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And glad you were all with us today. And we will see you again next time as we continue our study on More Than a Carpenter. So until then, we'll see you. God bless. Have a great night.